Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another homeschooling video today. It's been a while, so I thought that it was about due. And I was trying to think of a topic that I haven't covered here before because I've done hundreds of homeschooling videos. And yeah, I've had no idea what to talk about when it comes to homeschooling recently, which is why I've been doing so few. But today I'm going to be sharing some homeschooling topics that some might consider to be alternative topics that are great for free thinking families. As most of you know, I have been homeschooling my children for 16 years now. So I'm down to 5 children who are still school age out of my 11. And only one of them graduated from public school. He was homeschooled for 2 years in high school. I burned out, sent all my kids back to school for 2 years. That's another video entirely, and I actually do have one about that. But all the rest of them are homeschool graduates, and I'm still down to, the last 5. But as most of you know, I'm not someone to just follow your typical topics. I am not one of those normie homeschoolers that just basically follows whatever the curriculum says. I like to do things that not only interest my children, but that also interest me. Because when you do things as a parent with your children that you are interested in, that interest can be infectious. And even if your children are not particularly interested in the topic that you want, it does show them how to explore and how to research things that do spark their interest, and that it's okay to continue learning throughout all of your adulthood. So let's just get started on some topics that might be in some curricula. I doubt it. And if they are, it's certainly not with the spin that I put on them. So the first one is to study your hometown history. And yeah, this might be in your typical homeschool curricula, especially when it comes to social studies. But I don't just mean when it was founded or who the first mayor was or what sorts of trades they have there, which of course, those are all interesting things to learn about. I'm talking about digging deep into those weirder topics that most people don't know. So before I moved here, the town that I was living in had a lot of very strange history, like mining tunnels underneath our street not under the street, it was underneath the entire town pretty much. And I couldn't find any records of who actually built these tunnels in the first place. Another oddity was that the tunnels were named after streets in New York when they were sold to the people who owned the mine. But again, I couldn't find any names on where these mines came from. Where did these tunnels come from? Who actually dug all these tunnels out? No idea. I actually contacted a town historian, and he had no idea either. That is only one of the really strange things that I learned about that town. And I guarantee you that if you dig deep into your town or city or maybe a neighboring one, you'll find some interesting tidbits like that as well. And it can really help your children to see where you live in a completely new light. Another one, not particularly a topic, but more of an activity, is to do an architecture walk with your children. I love going for walks around the neighborhood to look at the different style buildings. And yeah, this is a time that I have pointed out mud flood windows to them, just asked them what they thought they could possibly be, why the sidewalks were cutting off half of the windows. And I think it's really important that when it comes to topics like this, don't do the same thing that schools do and tell your children what they should think about them. Of course, you can give them your ideas, and they're your children. They live with you. I'm sure that they already know the things that interest you and what you think about these things. But I really encourage you to point things out to them, but let them come up with their own theories as well, because at this point in time, we really don't have 100% concrete evidence on any of these things. So it's important to show them to your children, maybe talk to them about the things that you have learned, but in the end, to let them come up with their own theories about it. Another topic that you could share with your children is biblical cosmology. And I encourage you, though, if you do biblical cosmology, come at it from both sides. And the reason that I am telling you is because A, it does give you a more even-sided approach, and that helps you to not tell your children what to think. But at the same time, if your children do not know what most of the world thinks, they're going to stick out like sore thumbs, and they're not going to be able to come back with appropriate responses when people question them if they decide that biblical cosmology is the correct view of the earth. So that is one thing. And, I even have to say, a lot of people have asked me how I approached this. With me, I didn't even do it as a formal subject. With me, it's just having conversations with my children, maybe watching videos with them, or drawing pictures on the whiteboard, and saying, well, how would it be possible for this star to be visible in this season from this point in the universe on this side of the sun? Just things like that. And so that was something that my children really enjoyed doing. And you know what? I ended up with children on both sides of the fence. And again, that is okay, because you really need to let them make these topics their own, because that is what education is about, is not teaching your children what to think, but teaching them how to think. Another topic is petrified titans. I'm sure that you have seen mountains all over the world, pictures of them. I'm not saying that you travel all over the world, but I'm sure you've seen pictures of mountains all over the world that look like giants that have been petrified, hence the name Petrified Titans. And it's not just the typical sleeping giant that most people think of. You will find what look like giants in a final kiss, in a petrification. You will sometimes see a fist sticking up, or an entire detailed foot in some of these rocks. Other times you will see what look like elephants or other animals, crocodiles, serpents. Look into these, because this is something that is super interesting. And I have actually speculated that maybe this is where some of those tales of trolls and how when they are touched by sunlight, they turn into stone. Maybe that is where they came from, because they either saw these formations that certainly look like that, or maybe that's what actually happened in some cases. Again, we don't know. And so coming off of that, then I'm going to say trolls too. That was something that my youngest daughter really enjoyed looking into, because I had been telling her about the Petrified Titans. I was showing her pictures of them, and then she got really into trolls. She wanted to watch the movie about trolls. I think it was the one on Netflix. And so she watched that. And we got to talk about the history of trolls in these northern European countries, and how they didn't like the sound of bells, and they didn't like the smell of the blood of Christians. And all of this folklore is something that my daughter really got into. All from us. We were actually going for a walk. And as we were walking along this nature trail, I just started talking to her about Petrified Titans, because we were looking at some other oddities on the trail that made me think of that. Some other things along those lines, fairies, elves, anything that most people tend to look at as fairy tales. Just remember that a lot of these fairy tales are rooted in realities. And so a lot of children, they're going to have a lot of interest in fairy tales. And you're not going to find this angle coming from your typical homeschool or school curriculum. Another topic, man-made mountains. This is another one that I came up with just because of the area that I live in, because we typically look at mountains and just look at them for their majesty and their beauty, and just think, okay, well, they are there because, as we learned in geology class, when the land shifted, they kind of fused together. Some of it was pushed up, and that's how a lot of these mountains were formed. In my area, however, I have noticed that the mountains actually look like they are slag heaps or rubble piles from mining. And yes, there is a lot of mining in my area, but these mountains are certainly way too high for your typical slag heaps. So that brought so many conversations with my children about, could they really be rubble piles? Because they look exactly like giant versions of the rubble piles that we see from the actual mining quarries as we walk past them on our trails. So we have, an idea, or we actually specifically know what the real ones look like in comparison to these large ones. And again, it really is just a larger size. So many conversations about how they could have gotten there. Who could have gotten there? Could that have been giants who did that? So much. And even if this is something that you're like, oh, that's just all make believe, really, it helps to encourage your child's creativity, to let their imagination run wild. And again, it also encourages them to use their reasoning skills that God gifted them with. Okay, some more ideas, and pretty similar to the trolls. Nephilim, giants, titans. They're also known as titans in like Greek and Roman mythology. You could even learn about the giant of, I think it was Kandahar in Afghanistan, and this was back in the 1990s. I believe it was during the Persian Gulf War that there were some soldiers who claimed that they ran across a giant who came out of a cave, and they had an altercation, and one of the soldiers he passed away due to the giant, and this giant was supposedly taken away by a helicopter. So many interesting stories like that. So of course you can read the biblical stories of the Nephilim. You can talk about fairy tales and folk tales of all of these giants all around, but you can actually find some pretty recent eyewitness accounts that claim that they have seen giants. Another one, cryptids. I talk about cryptids all the time on my channel, so you will never run out of cryptids to study with your children. I actually wrote a unit study on cryptids specifically for this because, there's Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and the Mothman and other lake monsters. There, what else? You would think that I would know them all off the top of my head. There is the Wendigo in, I believe is it Canada? I'm not sure. There are the iguanodon. Well, they look like iguanodons, but I'm not really sure what they call them now. There is the Mokele Mbembe in the Congo. There are what look like pterodactyls over in Africa that have like these red glowing lights on their chest. There is the Yowie of Australia that is akin to Bigfoot, and there is the ice worm in Iceland. So many things to look at when it comes to cryptids. So, if your children are really into cryptids, that is actually a great way to introduce geography to them because there are so many cryptids from all over the world. You can also learn about where they came from, what the terrain is like, what the folk legends are there. You can tie so many things just from taking a look at what the cryptids are. So a lot of these topics might seem like they are trivial, but in fact, so much can arise from just that one point. Another topic that you can discuss with your children is the advanced architecture that we see around the world, whether it would be the beautiful advanced buildings that just don't seem to fit our narrative. They tell us horse and buggy, but then these beautiful ornate buildings that certainly don't look like they could have been built by people who only had horse and buggy technology. There's also the pyramids. There are other megalithic structures, and the way that it looks like some of these stones were kind of poured together because they are so tightly fit that you can't even fit a piece of paper between them. That is another really interesting topic with your children. And again, it's something that you can share your opinions on, but I would let your children come to their own conclusions about how they think these things may have possibly come about. Another idea, antediluvian times. It's not something that most people talk about. Most people, when they think of antediluvian times, which just means pre-flood era, they usually picture cavemen type people who are very primitive and don't know much. And it was only after the flood and after all that time passed that all of a sudden, we just sprung up out of nowhere and all this technology. When in fact, it certainly seems, especially if you have read the book of Enoch, which again is not canon, but it is something that the biblical authors did reference, not this specific portion, but in the book of Enoch, it does talk about how the Watchers introduced technology to the people living in these antediluvian times. So they certainly had more technology. They certainly had more intelligence than what we give them credit for. And in fact, it is thought that even Freemasonry, these secret societies, all originated in pre-flood times. They were far more sophisticated than most people imagine. Next, hybrids. Learning about hybrids. And I'm not talking about the automotive hybrids. I'm talking about hybrids like mermaids and satyrs and centaurs, minotaurs, kynocephaly, the dog-headed creatures, the chest-faced people. So many hybrids all around the world. And that's the most interesting thing about these hybrids, is that there are tales of the same types of creatures from all of these different civilizations that supposedly have had no contact with one another. But we do see drawings, we have writings, we have accounts of these same types of hybrid creatures all over the world that, society tends to just write off as fairy tales. But again, you have to ask, well, then how did they all know about it? Kind of like, how did all these different civilizations around the world have pyramids that were all so similar? Lots of ideas that you can come up with when it comes to just this topic alone. Old maps is another topic that I suggest that you look into, especially the Mercator maps are really interesting. There are so many other old maps that are just absolutely beautiful. It's not just outlines of land in the maps that I'm talking about. They will have all types of sea creatures drawn in them. They will have all these details. They will have little castles drawn in different locations. It will have little drawings of where mountains were, where cities were, what types of animals were in these locations. And yeah, some of the animals that you find are not what you would expect to find on a map. Even it's the 16th century Mercator map of the North Pole. And if you take a look at that, there are these 4 lands that are in a circle outside of, in the middle, this magnetic rock that they say is the North Pole. And the map writing is in Latin. So if anyone knows Latin, that would be helpful. But there is one of those islands that is on the outside in this circle, claims that there were pygmies who lived there. And I believe that someone else told me that there were giants on another one. And really, if you would, that could even make you want to read the story, The Smoky God, which talked about 2 sailors, a father and son, who kind of got lost and then ended up at the North Pole and encountered these giants there. So many things, again, that can stem from that one topic. And that's really the fun of homeschooling, is just following that rabbit trail, seeing where it's going to take you. You start in one place and you might end up in some place completely different, but there are so many different ways that you can get to that area. So you cover a lot of ground when it comes to this stuff. The last one that I'm going to share with you today, this is by no means the only list. It could go on and on and on. But the last one that I'm bringing up today is the idea that geology is biology. There are so many things that we can take a look at and that we are told is just geology. It's just rocks. But if you actually take a look very closely at some of these geological structures, they certainly seem to be gigantic pieces of wood or gigantic pieces of tree trunk. I believe it's the Hangman channel. There are numbers after his name, and I wish that I could remember what the numbers are. But if you would search it on YouTube, Hangman, he shows so many different similarities. If you go to a forest, you will have trees of today, modern trees, so to speak, and there remains branches that have broken off. And then he will show you these gigantic structures that most people think of as boulders actually look exactly the same as these branches, but 10, 100 times bigger. Almost the same way as the mountains by my house that look a lot like the slag heaps or the mining rubble. It's that sort of thing. It also brings to mind, what is that called? The one that looks like a Devil's Tower. Sorry. Anyway, Devil's Tower. Most people think, okay, that's basalt columns and that comes from volcanic rock. I might not be saying it exactly right, but that's the typical thought. While there are some people who will say, no, that is the trunk of a petrified gigantic tree. And yet there are others who believe that is actually a petrified ankle of a titan. So lots of theories to go on with that too. And again, it's just, it helps your children to retain or maybe in some cases to develop a sense of wonder that really should be a part of everyone's education. And if more people had that wonder brought into their homeschool, I'm sure a lot of people would like learning much more than they do. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to support my channel, I will leave a link in the description box for my channel membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.